The first of our speakers this morning is, as the Minister of State with responsibility for procurement, somebody who is going to be keenly aware of the friction in supply chain issues and how they are going to affect the business of climate action. Ladies and gentlemen, can I introduce to you Minister of State Ossian Smyth, TD.
Thanks, Philip.
Good morning.
Morning, everybody. Thank you, Philip. This area of energy security, price, sustainability, that is a niche area that very few people, I suppose, in Ireland, outside of this room, have paid much attention to. But in 1979, when I was 8 years old, it was the talk of the town. It was on everybody's lips. And I remember it, even though I was just 8, I can remember seeing kilometre-long queues outside the petrol stations. I remember seeing then people fighting fist to fist on the news at night because they'd got to the front of the queue, they'd run out of petrol, whose turn was it to get the last drop? And I remember when it was brought home to me that one morning I woke up and our family car wouldn't start because the petrol cap had been priced off during the night and somebody had stolen the petrol out of the tank. And some of you will be as old as me and will remember that time where people were at that point. And that is a point of crisis. That's the point where my father bought a bicycle for his first time, and we all went off together as a family. I remember thinking, this is great, you know, and I remember power cuts as well around the candles around the table. But the truth is that the power cuts were not as bad as the general shortage of fuel and the price. And I think that's what's happening at the moment. Although there's a lot of media focus on the potential for power cuts this winter, I think the chance is very low. However, the probability of having shockingly high energy bills that are challenging affordability and your ability to get to the end of the month is 100%, right? So I know the media have to deal with the thing that's today's issue, but we're less than 60 days away from people opening their energy bills in November, and that is going to cause trouble. And that is the focus. And what do we learn from the last I don't know if it's the last energy crisis, from the energy crisis of 79 anyway. There was a really rapid rebound afterwards, and everybody going back to the way it was, delighted to be able to resume their previous behaviour, and in fact, a glut of oil in the market. And I remember very cheap oil being available in the 80s. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of coming down the road in a year or 2 years, probably. We do see some softening of oil prices already, which is, some relief. But we probably are in here for the long haul. I don't think this is going to be just one winter. We put in sanctions on Russia, and the West sanctioned Russia, thinking Russia is a small economy, whatever it is, the size of Belgium or whatever in GDP terms. But really, it has really exposed our dependence on imported, not just oil, but coal and gas as well. So we are now in an economic war. Ireland clearly stated that we are not independent, we're not neutral in the war between Russia and Ukraine, but we're more than just not neutral, we're actually clearly involved. And Putin has very clearly said that he believes that his people can take more hardship than ours, and he believes he can win an economic war against us. And I think he's wrong. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. One of the things that we're at an advantage on is that in the EU we have our solidarity with our fellow countries who share our values and who are all facing this difficult winter coming towards us. So we're not one island on our own. We're part of a 500 million population of people who are facing this in slightly different ways. Obviously, we're an island and there's different energy dependencies in every country, but all of us are under great stress. I'm glad to see Ursula von der Leyen's comments yesterday. On Friday, there will be an emergency meeting of the EU Council of Energy Ministers, and Eamon Ryan will be there, and there will be decisions made around windfall taxes, around common demand reduction across Europe, and around practical ways that we can together fight this war. So, what's happening in Ireland? What's our response? What are we doing to ensure security of supply? You will know that in April we have our national energy security framework was published, which was our general approach. But part of that was to do an energy security review and to say, what are the specific measures we need to take. That review has completed, and it will go out for public consultation in a couple of weeks. So you can look forward to that. The Climate Action Plan has been, from last year, will be updated also in the coming weeks, and that will be far more specific. There will be far fewer actions than last year, but they will be tighter and there will be more measurable. We are still on target for an 80% reduction in fossil fuel use by 2030. We need that more than ever. Our ambitions for climate action, our ambition to decarbonise our economy, we can see that is absolutely vital now, and that this energy crisis is not about the price of renewables. It's not about a shortage in the renewable sector. It's about it is a fossil fuel crisis, and that's where our problem is. We haven't decarbonised fast enough. There's no point in regretting the past, but we are in a strange position in Ireland where we've done so well on onshore wind, and we've made no progress on offshore. We were the first country, we were the leading country to have the first offshore wind farm in Arklow with an Irish company, and yet all the other countries passed us out by far. Hardly any solar in Ireland until that recent first solar farm. And yet, when you travel around Europe, and even when you went north of the border, you could see solar panels on every rooftop. So clearly, we went for one area. We went for onshore wind. We've done great that we've got nearly 40% of our electricity coming from that source. But you need diversity. You can't put all your eggs in one basket, and we've done that, and we really need now to go forward. And you saw that in the debate on agriculture and what cuts they could take and how much we should go. The result of that at the end was a decision to increase the ambition for solar and for offshore wind, to add an extra 2 gigs on offshore wind, another 2 gigawatts for solar, and a large quantity of anaerobic digestion. And that will be backed up then with government policies and with actions. And it's easy to come forward and say make strategic goals without actually having the underpinning actions to go with it. But now we see that we really need to do this. We really need to move forward. We have been held up by planning delays. And if you look at Repower EU, which is the EU strategy for what to do about this, there's 3 pillars to it. And one of them is to compress the planning times. And their general approach is they're saying it shouldn't take more than 2 years to get planning for major infrastructure. And in designated areas, every member state has to designate go-to areas in which it will only take 1 year to get your planning permissions. Of course, we need a planning system, but it is a paradox if the planning system is frustrating our ability to plan. So it needs reform, and I know that in the Department of Housing they're working on that. But also we've changed the law. So we have brought in a law that allows us to directly grant planning permission in an emergency. And that should have been there, but it's there now. So we can directly consent energy infrastructure where there is an immediate need. And we are in a war, so we have an immediate need. Okay, so I think I should say a few things in detail about offshore wind, because I know many of you are working in that sector. And my department has prepared a few things for me to say. So rather than kind of giving you my own opinions and political views on things, I'm going to stick to the script for once. So as I said, we had this ambition to do 5 gigs of offshore wind by 2030 and another 30 in the coming decade, and we've increased that by another 2 gigawatts. And that will be linked with the production of green hydrogen. And I'm delighted to see Catherine Sheridan here today, who's going to be speaking later about that. All these changes are really going to spur, as you know, major changes in an economy or in a society are linked with major opportunities for entrepreneurship. And there will be huge economic activity as a result of this transformation. And all of you, I imagine here, many of you are involved in working in that area. We started the process of consenting our first offshore wind projects, and they'll contribute to meeting our targets. The Maritime Area Planning Act of 2021 provides legislation for an entirely new marine planning system. That was, for us, that was the third most important piece of legislation the government brought in. The first was the Climate Action, the Climate Act to cut our emissions in half in 10 years and to reach net zero by 2050. The second piece of legislation was the Land Development Act, because we need to do something on housing and have a national house building programme. And finally, the Maritime Area Planning Act. The Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications is designing a pathway for another batch of projects. So this will be the second batch of projects to progress through the new consenting system when the Maritime Area Regulatory Authority is established in early next year. The work on the Offshore Renewable Energy Development Plan is now underway. The plan will provide an evidence base for the identification of the most suitable areas for sustainable offshore renewable energy development, and it will set a pathway for the development of offshore renewables beyond 2030. A cross-departmental offshore wind delivery task force has been established to accelerate and drive delivery, and also to capture wider and longer-term economic and business opportunities associated with the development of offshore renewables in Ireland. This includes identifying supporting infrastructure and supply chain opportunities as the industry is developed. Offshore renewable energy is, of course, vital to Ireland's green energy transition, and it reduces our dependency on imported fossil fuels, it lowers our greenhouse gas emissions, and it strengthens our security of supply. The cost of offshore wind has been falling globally over the past number of years, and it's driven by technological advances and by competitive auction pressures, and accordingly there is increased interest in offshore wind projects off the Irish coast. The Department is drafting the terms and conditions for the offshore wind-specific auctions under the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. Owing to the specific scale and nature of typical offshore wind farms, dedicated auctions are initially required to support the longer-term potential of this technology in Ireland. As well as further auctions for onshore wind and solar, at least 3 offshore auctions are currently planned for this decade. One of the questions, I suppose, that's in the media at the moment, or in the public mind, is the question of a windfall tax. That's one of the things that Ursula von der Leyen will be discussing on Friday with member states. A number of member states have already introduced this kind of tax. And the question is, should this be limited to fossil fuel suppliers? Should it be limited to those who are involved in extraction rather than generation? Or should it extend to those who've made windfall profits in the renewable sector? And there definitely is an argument for extending into the renewable sector where there have been excessive profits made, and where the nature of their contracts is that there's no upper bound on what they can charge. So that in the most recent renewable energy auctions, we're setting a price at which it's sold, a maximum price, whereas in the past we really set a minimum price, a floor price. And so that will have to be looked at. But really that will affect older contracts rather than newer ones. And we do have to consider what's the effect on investment and our competitive position against other European countries. Yesterday, you will have seen there was a cabinet meeting, and the government decided that on a demand response on what they were going to do to limit the public sector's energy use. And really part of that is about making sure that we are practicing what we preach, that we're turning down the thermostats in our own government buildings, turning off power earlier in the day, and that also has to extend into the corporate sector. So you will be aware that the CRU has issued new tariffs for large electricity consumers, and they've come to me and they're shocked and upset, but everybody has to do their share, and that includes the corporate sector. So we will charge more for large corporates who are using a lot of power during peak hour. We've had with the last crisis, we've tried to flatten the curve, and this time we'll be trying to flatten the peaks. And if we can do it in really what was very, very challenging last 2 years, of course, in a life and death situation, and we took very, very dramatic measures that involved shutting down entire sectors of the economy, and yet we managed to get through it. And it's for that reason that I think that we can get through this winter and the next winter as well, that we can overcome a problem that is caused by a malign enemy this time rather than a virus, but we can make it. If we can do it the last time, we can do it this time. But what is key to that is very clearly explaining to people why we're doing it and building a sense of solidarity and common purpose. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you on what is really the major issue of the day at the moment, a great national challenge for everybody. And I would be delighted to speak to any of you if you contact my office in person afterwards if you want to discuss things with me then. Thank you. Oh, do you want to ask?
I do. Do you want to take a seat there? Fortunately for you, we only have time for about 2 questions at most. I want to ask you a question in the short term and then a question in the middle distance. First off, as we are here talking about energy security, can you talk to me about energy security, please, in a world where the most Brexity of Brexiteers, Jacob Rees-Mogg, is now the person who holds the energy portfolio in the United Kingdom?
So our connection with the UK is vitally important for a number of reasons. Our 3/4 of our gas comes from the UK. We have a land border with UK jurisdiction, and we are trying to build an overland electricity connection into Northern Ireland from the Republic, which has been the subject of many years.
For 14 years now, yes.
Which has been the subject of, and which is vital so that we can balance our electricity north and south of the grid. And you know that the grid is unified at this stage or run by the same organisation. So our connections with the UK, our energy connections with the UK are absolutely critical. And that's why it is so important that we maintain good relationships, good diplomatic relationships with the UK, no matter who is in power and no matter what kind of rhetoric is used, that we never slip into, the old ways and seeing the British as the enemy. We have to work with them because we are codependent.
And in your experience, is the rhetoric that we hear in public very different to what's happening behind closed doors?
I can tell you that at official level, there have been really, really close contacts, and that's never, ever slipped. So when you're thinking about, for example, the chief medical officer in the Republic and the chief medical officer in the North, or the chief information officer or something working together, you find that in fact at official civil service, NGO and agency level, there's never been any loss of friendship. And in fact, a lot of it is rhetoric. People saying things for effect.
My second question is the one that speaks most immediately to one of the themes of the motifs of this particular conference, and that is the planning system and the delays that we are currently experiencing. What can you tell me about the human resources that the government is throwing at, hopefully, the various bodies like On Board Planola, SEAI, the new maritime regulatory body, which hasn't even started recruiting yet, as far as I know. Can you offer any kind of reassurance about the numbers of decision makers that are going to be in the key roles in the years ahead?
I can tell you that the budget will be made in sort of 3.5 weeks from now, and that I can tell you that the agencies like Board Planola will not be underfunded. That there will be sufficient people, as you know. The second most important issue for government at the moment, after the cost of energy, is housing. And so housing has the same critical point. It needs people to make decisions, and the decision-making ability of Board Planola has been under political pressure recently, let's say. So we need to strengthen them, and we need to give them. We need to make
very
sure
gentle and delicate euphemism. I think. Well done.
The resources, they will not be constrained by resources anyway.
All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Minister of State Ossian Smyth, thank you very much indeed. Now.